Welcome back, Swifters. This is Prof G, and I'm wondering, are you frustrated with your app that it's tough to Sherlock through and find the exact Pokemon that you're looking for? Well, this would be much easier if we added a search bar to our Catch-em-all app, and that's just what we're going to do in this lesson. Let the hacking commence! So the first thing we're going to do is get a search bar to appear at the top of our list. And while it'll take more code to make this functional, getting it to appear is super easy. We simply add a .searchable modifier to our list. I'll code fold our list just so that we can see its modifiers more clearly, and at the end of the toolbar, modifiers closing curly, I'll just add .searchable. Now select the option with just the text attribute. Notice that this is a binding string, and this is going to contain the string that the user types into the search field. So press return to accept this, and now we're going to have to create a variable to hold this binding string value. So up top, under my @state object, I'm just going to enter @state private var, we'll call this search text, equals empty string. Then we'll return to our searchable modifier that we just entered, and we'll pass in $search text as our binding string. And search my Snorlax, Swifter, will you look at that? We've now got a search bar up top. Now, unfortunately, it does not work yet, but let's make this happen. Now, one thing I'd like to do first is, instead of iterating through the creature array using a range and an index value, I'm going to want to instead go back to iterating through just an array. And we'll do this because it's easier to filter out our results as an array, and we can now do this because in the prior lesson, we made the creature struct identifiable, so it now has an ID property. So to change this, I'm going to highlight everything between the parens in the list, backspace to delete it, and I'll replace this simply with creaturesVM.creatureArray. Now, since we're no longer using an index, I'm going to replace this with creature, lower camel case, since that's a good name for the creature struct that we're getting when we iterate through our creatures array. And in detail view, I'm still passing in a creature struct to the detail view, but now I can do this with just that lowercase creature property. And in the label, I'm going to remove everything in front of the name property and replace this with lowercase creature, and I'll get rid of the end closing double quotes and paren. And if the edits are correct, you should see no errors in the lines that we just changed, but we see errors in the onAppear statement below. Now, the onAppear actually has quite a bit of programming logic that's specific to our data. So why don't we break this out as a method that's in our creatures view model? That would be a much more MVVM location for this. So let's refactor. Why don't we highlight and cut out everything inside of the curlies for onAppear, make sure that you don't accidentally take more or fewer curlies than you need, and we'll head over to creatures view model. And why don't we put this just before the load all function? We'll add another function, func load next if needed. We'll start off with open and close parens and open and close curlies, and in between the curlies, let's paste in what we just cut out. Now, instead of this first if statement, I'm going to replace this with a guard statement. Guard statements can be nice because it removes a level of indentation in your closure. So I'll say guard let last creature equals creature array dot last else open and close curlies, and in between the curlies we'll return. And notice we don't need to refer to creatures VM dot anymore, just creatures array, because we're already inside of the creatures view model. So this guard statement lets me get rid of this if let statement and it's closing curly, and I'll fix the indentation. And let's see, with this value that I just highlighted, we should be comparing the current creature that has just appeared in our onAppear with the last creature in the creatures array. Now, we can't do this unless we actually pass in that creature that just appeared. So let's add a parameter to our function between the parens that says creature colon, and this is of type capital C creature. And if I pass this in, now I can compare the creature, lowercase c, and I'm going to compare its ID property here, not its name. An ID property is even better because it's guaranteed to be unique, so I'll say .id after creature, and I'm going to check to see if this is equal to last creature .id, no longer .name. And I can delete the creature's VM dot that's in front of URL string. Again, I don't need it because I'm already inside of creature's view model. And I'll do the same thing with the call to get data. We no longer want to have the creature's VM dot out in front. And it's also important to remember, although Xcode would remind us if I forgot this, since we're writing a function that calls an async function with an await keyword, we want to add the async keyword just before the opening curly of the function. And this little bit of refactoring is done, so now let's make sure that we call it properly. In our creatures list view, we'll head over there, and now in our onAppear, we can call this, and remember, if we enter just creaturesVM.loadNext if needed, Xcode grays this out and says, we can't use this in this context because the function supports concurrency. Now I'm going to accept this by pressing return anyway, and I'm going to pass in lowercase creature. Again, that's the value we get as we iterate through our list. So again, what this function call is going to do is it's going to take each creature as it appears, and it's going to compare it with the last element in the array to see if those are the same. And if it is the same, it's going to call another page of JSON. But to make this call work, do you remember what we need to do? Since we're inside of onAppear, we need to surround this call with capital T task. Then I'll cut out the load next if needed down below. I'm going to add the await keyword between the curlies, and then I'll pass in the call after that. And that's it. So we can resume our live preview, and if we scroll, we can see that the next page of JSON is loaded when it's needed. You can click on Load All. This works too, although we didn't impact any of the code in Load All, but it's nice to know that everything is working. And my API calls are taking a while, so we can see the progress view is really handy here. This all works great. Now we're ready to actually get our search bar to work. And the way we're going to make this happen is to create a computed property that contains an array of creatures that contain any phrase that the user enters into the search bar. So just above the closing curly in my creatures list view struct, I'm going to create a new variable. This is again going to be a computed property. So I'll say var, I'm going to call this search results, lower camel case. Then I'll say colon, bracket, capital C creature, bracket, because I want this to compute a result that is an array of creature structs. And then I'll open and close curly, and this is where we put in the calculations that will compute the result that we return. So in this calculated property, again, it doesn't store value. It's going to calculate data based on what's in the curlies. We're going to do this based on what's inside of the search text variable, which is what the user entered into the search bar. So we're going to start by saying if search text dot is empty. And if this is the case, meaning the user hasn't entered anything into the search text, then we want to return all the creatures that we've downloaded. So between curlies, we'll say return creaturesVM.creaturesArray. No change. We didn't search on anything. But else, open and close curlies, if we have something in search text, then we'll return the results of filtering out just the array elements that contain the search text value. And we do this with return creaturesVM.creaturesArray.filter. This is that higher order function that will filter out just the results that match a criteria. So I'm going to press return to accept this, and I'm going to use the shorthand in here. So I'm going to delete any parentheses that I have in here and replace them with the open and close curlies of a closure. And in the closure, I'm going to pass in $0. That represents each creature that we're iterating through in the creaturesVM.creaturesArray, followed by .name.capitalize. We want to have that in here since we've got capitalized results, and we'll say .contains, press return to accept this, and we're going to pass in search text. And whoops, I didn't spell creature correctly in between my square brackets up here. And now in either case, we are going to have an array called search results, which will contain either all of the creatures array if there's nothing entered in search text, or it's going to contain just those elements of creature array that match the search result that the user entered in the search text. So now what do? Well, we want to make one more change, and that's in our list. Instead of passing in the full creaturesVM.creaturesArray, if we option click on the creatures array, remember, this is an array of creature struct, we're going to instead pass in search result, which we also define down here as an array of creature structs. So now let's try this out. I'm going to load all my Pokemon. I'm going to search for everybody's favorite, Snorlax. And ooh, I didn't know there was a Snow Runt. Why don't we look at that guy? And then we'll go back and we'll look at Snorlax, and there he is, looking happy and sleepy as ever. Nice work, Swifter. Search field complete. And you can explore even more if you want. For example, you can check out a list of Pikachus. We see there's a Pikachu Rockstar. Ooh, a Pikachu PhD. I didn't know about that guy. Maybe we can get him to teach Swift. And you can look at these other ones. But if we check out Pikachu Starter down here, we notice that this doesn't show anything. In the next lesson, I'm going to point out that we're getting a JSON error here, and I'm going to show you how we can deal with this, both by modifying our creature detail struct and by expanding our async image result to take a look at the phase. But until then, you should feel fantastic about your skills in mastering searches. Continue to hack, Swifter.